Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others, Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." Jesus asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and that he would be killed, and after 3 days he would rise again. Jesus said all these things quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Jesus called the crowds up to Jesus called the crowd with the disciples and said to them, "If you want to come and be my followers, then let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my many words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." This ends the reading of our gospel. You may be seated. Jesus said to Peter, "Get behind me." When Ron and I were very first married, Ron was still working for C.R. England as a truck driver. When Ron would get into Cheyenne, he would go to usually the Flying J, and he would call me and tell me that he's here. And I would run up to Flying J at midnight or 2 in the morning or whenever it was, and I would go see him and find him somewhere, either in the parking lot. The thought of looking like a lot lizard always was in the forefront of my mind. For those of you who don't know what a lot lizard is, you might want to ask somebody who's laughing. Anyhow, I would find him, and life was good. Then one day, while he was driving that big truck, I got a phone call from the fire chief in Rock Springs, Wyoming, where Ron had tested almost 2 years ago, prior to that, to become a firefighter. And Harvey said, "I need to speak with him. I want to offer him a job." I said, "Well, sir, my husband drives us 18-wheeler, and I have no way of getting a hold of him until he gets a hold of me first." So Harvey said, when you get a call from him, have him call me. So it just happened, Ron called me that same evening, and I told him, I said, do you know a man named Harvey Kozad? And he said, I do. And I said, it's hard to look in this way. I said, he needs you to call him. He wants to offer you a job. And he said, no way, you're kidding. I said, honey, how do you think I know the man's name? If I'm kidding. So he called Harvey, and Harvey offered him a job. So quickly, after 2 whole months of marriage, he came back to Cheyenne. He helped us pack up our home and our moving van, and that was exciting. But before all that could happen, Ron had to return the semi to Salt Lake. His last run was to the Budweiser plant for beer. It's a long wait. There are trucks lined up 3 and 4 deep to get loaded with beer. So by the time Ron finally got loaded, it was 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And so I now have to follow him and his load of beer to Salt Lake. My friends, I had never been any farther than Laramie, Wyoming. I had no idea where I was going. So we drive, and there's a fellow CR England driver who's also carrying beer. But he pulls off at Little America, the town, to go to sleep. We unfortunately didn't have that luxury, so we drove, and we drove, and we drove. And I was first learned about the sisters during this drive. And thankfully, it was August, so there was no snow on the sisters. If you don't know what the sisters are, they are 3 vertical straight and vertical down hills on I-80 on your way to Utah. So that wasn't so bad. But once we got to Park City, Ron said, you are now going to have to drive down Parley's Canyon ahead of me. All this time, I had been behind Ron, feeling secure and knowing he's ahead of me. If there's danger, he'll let me know, because I had the CB so I could talk to him. But now I had to venture down Parley's Canyon in the middle of the night, unsure of where I was going, until Ron could meet me at the bottom. You see, an 18-wheeler can't exactly drive 65 up Parley's Canyon. And being an England truck, he couldn't drive over 65 anyhow, because they were governed. So I had to leave the security of following and being behind Ron to venture forward myself, alone, in the dark, on a road I had no idea what I was doing. If you've never been through Parley's Canyon, it is an experience. So I made it to the grove of evergreen trees that he told me to wait for him at. And eventually, for what seemed like hours, he finally showed up. He said, I'm coming up behind you. Get ready to go. Boy, was I ready to follow him some more. And I followed him until we made it to the CR England.
Just say base.
Home base where they live. And he dropped off the truck and all the beer. And he got in the car, and now he could drive. I was never so happy to be behind somebody. That's what God tells notice the front of your bulletin, it says, "Get behind me." That's where we belong anyhow. Anytime we think, "I am so sorry about this," anytime we think that we can move forward on our own without Jesus leading us, we sadly end up in a mess. Going forward by yourself with no one to have your back or your front is scary. Jesus wasn't being mean to Peter when he said, "Get behind me." He needed Peter to be behind him because, one, he was going to need Peter later during his time of trial. And two, Peter needed to learn that he, one, didn't have all the answers, and two, he needed to know that he still needed Jesus. And we still need Jesus. Because what we heard in James this morning is that little old thing in there, that tongue that some of you enjoy eating from the cow. That little critter gets us in so much trouble when we are just putting it out there and not thinking about it, thinking about how this would affect whoever it is. We're not thinking about, is this really what Jesus would want me to be saying to this person, to these people, or about a situation? You heard our tongue referred to as a piece of poison and fire from hell. And if you've ever ticked off your wife, I'm sure that's exactly what you felt. Yeah, I won't tell your wives that you're shaking your heads a little bit. We need to always remember that Christ goes before us. He went before us on the cross so that as we are left behind, we have nothing to fear. All the work of our sins were taken care of because Christ went before us. The town of Lynch is suffering greatly this day. And my hope and prayer is that before people begin to speak and or judge the events of that night, that first they listen to what God would have them say and not judge who committed this horrendous offense to the human bodies, and not to spread rumors of, "Oh, well, I heard." The family, the community needs us to rally around them and not surround them with gossip, innuendos, or hearsay. Christ is with them. But in the family's anger, perhaps, they may not feel that. It may feel like Christ has left them. So if you know this family, if you know people in this community, that journey alone, that Christ is before them, putting people, peas are bad, I don't know why I'm looking at that light every time this does that, I'm not sure. Let them know they're not alone. Christ is there in and amongst them, and He is walking with them. Let us use our tongues and the fact that Jesus is ahead of us to go and be the disciples that God has called us to be. Yeah. Amen. Our hymn